Hello and welcome to Mass Media Talk. I'm Brian Howard and Stacy Tyler here to talk to you all things mass media. Today we're going to take on some of the industry effects of mass media. We're going to talk about its impact on us, some things like vowels, typology, the elections, how to decipher what's good and what's not. Is there anything good during the election season? We'll try to figure that out, and all kinds of other things. But what do you want to jump on first? Maybe let's take a little historical value. So, mass media really hasn't been around that long in terms of, the whole world. And so early studies indicated that it was a powerful media, almost a hypodermic needle or a silver bullet, it was called. And so the thinking was, go to the movie theater, they'd have those newsreels at the beginning of the movie theater. And the thought was if you showed that, everybody would react the same. It would have a direct and immediate impact. Along those lines of thinking, then if you saw an ad for a product, you'd go and buy it. Or if a newspaper endorsed a candidate, that candidate was going to win. Clearly, there's some flaws in that today. So let's talk about, what do you think about that, Stacy? It's interesting that was pretty much kind of the consensus early on, but clearly that's changed.
Changed, yes, absolutely. And it's changed so much, now that we have these focuses on niche messaging and recognizing that certainly everyone does not perceive messages in the same way, but that's really the beauty of humanity, in that we're able to, talk to other people, understand different perspectives, see things in different ways. And also, as we have recognized with technology, we now get advertisements that are even more specific to us. And I think niche messaging is so vital to today's advertising industry, and it's surviving really that has to know its market, has to know its niche and narrow market in order to advertise. These blanket one style messaging,
Sure.
Billboards just don't cut it anymore. They're not effective.
Yeah, well, tell that to the billboard providers, right? Because they're still everywhere. But you can kind of
It's
see where
true.
this came from, because early on there were a lot of newspapers in any given city, but still three or four, not a lot of, not like today, of course, where everybody's a newspaper, right? Uh,
Yes.
Radio, there are a few powerful radio stations that people would listen to. TV came along, a limited number of stations. So it was almost a one-way model, right? You send out your information, broadcast it, send out the newspaper. What kind of feedback are you going to get, and what kind of studies are you going to do to be able to identify what kind of impact that has? And then you have, like the overblown radio scare, War of the Worlds, where, supposedly half the world was jumping out of buildings. And there definitely were some people who were impacted by that, but it really scared a lot of people, and then you have things like the subliminal messaging thing where people say, oh my gosh, they flashed Coke bottles in the movies and everyone's buying Coke. And then of course that one's been proven false as well. But so you can kind
Yes.
of see where the model comes from, and people being very worried about new innovations. What kind of impact is it going to have? I think we had the same worry still, but not quite as much about the internet. Is it going to change the world? Well, yeah, it did, but probably not the way most people thought it would. So it's interesting to see where it came from. Then you can kind of understand it. But clearly right now we think, man, a 60-second ad like what they used to see in the old 50s and 60s on television is probably going to make us laugh, and probably not going to get us to buy anything.
And we probably wouldn't even watch a 1 minute ad anymore. you know, just even our attention spans and our time, how I've been watching a couple of old movies with my kids for Halloween. We watched Arsenic and Old Lace a week ago, and my kids thought it was way too slow. They did not enjoy the film, and I thought, oh no, my own children are going the way of the world.
Yeah.
We have to have quick little snippets. Even just the length of things has changed.
Yeah.
um and I do think, though, some of the specific parts of advertising, like geographic, demographics, social class, psychographics, all of those still have a part to play. Geographic, we used to see, local television ads. We still see those local radio ads. We still
Yeah.
hear them. And I think it's even more important for local businesses on social media. They still look for, people locally to advertise to. So a lot of these things still remain important. It's just the mode of operation, the way that the advertisement is put out has changed significantly.
Absolutely. In fact, you brought that up. I was talking about vowels has been around for a long time, and there's lots of other things like this, but we bring it up in our class, values and lifestyles. Basic study of psychographics, segmenting people based on feelings, thoughts, beliefs, as opposed to character, traits like male, female, geographic. It's interesting when, they combine the geography with the psychographics and you get things like PRISM, which is fun. I have students look up, it's called PRISM Lifestyle Cycles. And you can look at a geographic area and they have these segmented lifestyle traits. So, mostly male, mid 30s, drive a Dodge truck, watch, hunting shows on TV. By the way, that's shotguns and pickups. That's the one that's in my area where I live. So that's a lot of fun. But it's similar to what we talk about in advertising. Instead of breaking it down to females, 25 to 42 who live in a geographic area. Now you do have the age group, but also now you make some sort of persona or, avatar, people call it. And so instead you're trying to personalize it. So doesn't like dogs, enjoys whatever it is, and then you can get more of the psychology on why they make decisions as opposed to just throwing out there, hey, they live in this area, they're a female, they must like this, which, you can
Exactly.
line up 30 females who live in the same area who are about the same age, and what's going to happen. Most of them are going to have differing opinions, right? A few of them might like the same thing. So I've always been interested in those kind of segmentation like vowels. What's your take on those? It's interesting when the students take the vowels test, some of them get a little angry because they're labeled as a striver, which, striver. But the main thing is they're capable, willing, trying to make it to the top. They just don't have a degree and don't make any money. So they're a striver, right? So they don't like that because it sounds like they're, just wannabes. But what do you think about those things?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, and I do think it's a really effective way to advertise, especially when you are, as we mentioned, talking about like elections, for example,
Yeah.
and that's where getting into beliefs and what people think about certain issues is so vital. It's not just, are you interested in buying Tide detergent or do you drink Coke or, any of those kinds of things. This is a much deeper matter. And so I think that using psychographic tools can be really valuable in those things. And certainly, and I always throw out the disclaimer, we can't put every person into a box. These categories don't apply to everyone. And no, certainly the survey isn't going to categorize everyone correctly. But I think by and large, it does a pretty good job.
Yeah. Yeah, combine that with what the information we get through social media, each even makes it more individualized, right? But you know,
Absolutely.
as you're talking about electives, some of the things people could look at, right? Notice almost every TV ad, the candidate, look at what's behind them. American flags, music to set the tone. That's the
Hmm.
positive ad. Now, when it's a negative ad towards the candidate, what do they look like? The poor lighting on their face. They catch them in a snapshot where they're grimacing. The music is suspenseful or worse, like a
Yeah.
horror movie. And up pops these things, Fred Johnson stole from children or whatever it is. And, and probably a lot of the things are based in truth. It's one of those twisting kind of facts, So I got 5 parking tickets when I was 18. And so he was a chronic lawbreaker. It's like, and so, yeah, it did break the law. Yeah, multiple times. Yes. But they were parking tickets, right? So it's interesting. What's your take on these political ads and how do we decipher them or at least, look at them with a media literate point of view?
Yeah, and I think that's so important. Brian, I think we could probably talk for an hour easy on all of the ways that you can decipher what the ads are, but I did want to share on newslit.org. Students, this is an excellent resource. They have what they're calling a virtual toolbox that has a lot of information on how to understand election material, whether it's in a news story, different strategies that news organizations use to highlight certain parts about polling or, bring out certain things about how a candidate has voted in the past or what their personal background is and how that can really skew how we view certain candidates. And it's important to be aware of some of the strategies that news organizations use depending on, which way some of these places sway, where they tend to lean. And so newslet.org is a great resource. And also the National League of Women's Voters has vote411.org. And that shows you if you've been registered to vote, and also shows you what is on your ballot. So you can take a look and see and be prepared. Study up on issues, on propositions, and things like that might be on your ballot, so you're prepared when you
Yeah.
head to the polls.
Yeah, it's interesting. The polling has changed dramatically. When I worked at KBYU and we did election
Oh,
coverage,
okay. Sure.
wall-to-wall election coverage, right? And they had a professor down there who was really famous for his exit polling. He'd take groups of students and they'd go to the different places across Utah, and he'd combine BYU, Utah State, any of the universities, and they'd have volunteers to do exit polling. Well, they had one year where it was fatally flawed. Something went wrong. And that happens. But even worse, now you probably, I'm guessing it was probably with George Bush with that contested election. Then the
That's
polling
right.
data showed one thing, even the last couple elections. But you got to understand, how many people, if we asked everybody who's listening, all the students, how many of you would stop and take a poll? How many of you would pick up your phone for a number you don't recognize and take a poll? How many of you are doing anything? And so understanding that if you're not willing to do it, who is? And
Yeah,
typically, not to over stereotype, but the people who are willing to do that are usually really adamant one way or the other. And and in an election year like with Donald Trump, there were a lot of Donald Trump supporters that were kind of embarrassed to be so, just because they thought, oh no, I get criticized. So when they're coming out of the polling place, they're not stopping. They're not telling you who they voted for. And so that particular election was a big surprise that Trump won back, 6 years
that's
ago,
true.
because, polling is what it is. So, knowing the background, how do polls happen? Who do they ask? And it's supposed to be
Hmm.
random, and you'd stop people as they exit the polling places. Who's going to stop? And, why? When I used to work in television, then we'd stop people coming out of polling places for bond elections for schools. Well, I'd get tons of people saying, oh, we need to support the kids, love education. Nobody's going to stop and say, hey, I'm not going to pay for that school. The bonds failed, right? But I got 20 people who tell me how great it is and that they voted for it and we should all vote for schools. But it failed
It's
miserably
true.
because there wasn't a single soul. Well, maybe one who's kind of crazy, doesn't care. It's like, I hate school. I don't ever want to go back there. So, you got to understand how that works. And polling is getting harder than ever because, we don't answer phone calls. We don't want spam. So I think that's part of being media literate is understand when we're talking about this exit polling data. Is it really that accurate? As good as it gets, but it's as good as it gets.
Such a great point. Those are great points, Brian. And even just taking a survey online, nobody
Yeah.
has to be honest about anything. And
No.
people could just, take one for fun and mark whatever they want. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we do certainly have to take that with a grain of salt. And it's just really an important time to study the issues out for yourself and learn about these candidates and their backgrounds and make the best decision you can. And that's where that comes with a little bit of prayer and studying as well. You got to
Yeah.
combine those two, I think, and have in order to put that faith towards some of these people that we're electing into office.
Absolutely. Have a good neighbor that does some serious studying and she comes around and passes out what she finds to everybody. Actually, nicely done. I'm glad she does it. And we should all probably be at least half that diligent. Because a lot of times now, for somebody who hasn't ever gone to vote yet, you should. But it's also important to do a little bit of research first. Because
Yeah.
the thing that kills me is this name recognition order. Why are there 1,000 little signs everywhere on my street? It's because you go into polling place and you look down this list and you don't know any of them, but you recognize one name because you saw it 100 times, and so maybe you vote for them.
It's
You don't know
so
anything
true.
about them. Really, don't even know their political affiliation, probably, anything they stand for, and especially in the local elections, that's so tough, right? Because
So
they're
true.
hard to, but they probably have more impact on us individually, locally, right? If suddenly your front lawn gets taken away and they're paving over it, you say, "Hey, why did that happen?" It's because you weren't paying attention to the last election. That's what they ran on. They were going to increase the infrastructure, and by the way, they're going to wipe out your front yard. So definitely something to pay attention to.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yes, I think that name recognition goes a long way, but we do still need to do our due diligence and
Yeah.
research ourselves for
Yeah.
sure.
Stacey, do you want to talk about? I know this is always a controversial one. Part of this chapter we're talking about is conditioning audiences. What do you think about this? Because it sounds very ominous, conditioning audiences. Like we're all walking into a room and spirals in front of our eyes and we're being brainwashed. Uh, what's your take on that?
I think we are conditioned, but I think a lot of it is based on our own media usage, right?
Hmm.
I mean, if you every time you watch a YouTube video, ring the bell, it's just like the Pavlov's dog, right? I mean, every
Right.
time if you're interested in finding out more information, or you love to follow someone and you want to know what they're up to, what products they're interested in, you're going to make an effort to follow them, to be a part of their advertising, whatever it is. And so I do think that we are conditioned to come back again and again and again. And I think that is really something that social media in particular has
Hmm.
become very, very good at getting us to do. And I think it's interesting on the iPhone app where you can track your media usage and you can see just how many times you've even picked up your phone to see, for alerts, or see if someone is, you know, someone that you're following is going live, or has posted something new. And so I think we really do have to be careful about the amount of time that we're investing in being conditioned,
Yeah.
and what kinds of things we're being conditioned for. But
Yeah. I agree.
I don't think maybe it's as ominous, yeah, as maybe some people might be led
Yeah.
to believe.
Well, I like to equate it. We talked about like crumble cookies last time, right? So if
Yes,
you'd never heard of the store, it's brand new. What do they do? Well, they go out and give samples out, right? And they're delicious. You say, oh, I like that. I'm going to come into the store. And they put all this time and effort to get you in the store so you try a cookie. And then if you come in, if the cookies are terrible, of course, then you're not conditioned to come back. Now you're conditioned to never come back again, right? So they try and give you something. And then they say, here's our club card. Every 10th cookie, you get a free one. It's like, great. So now I want to come back. I want to get that free one. And is there
it's
anything wrong with
true.
that? No, that's marketing, and you're getting something you want. Maybe it's going to, make you unhealthy, but it's still something you want. And I think, in media, the same thing, especially in an advertising run media. The more people that watch, the more money you make. So you want people to come back,
Yeah,
and that's why I think like you're scrolling through like Instagram, your stories, it just keeps going, right? It never stops. It doesn't wait for you. It goes to the next one and the next one. Even when you're watching most television now, that's streaming television, you're watching a series and it ends with rolls credit that go by in about 5 seconds, zing, and it starts the new episode coming up, episode 25. And if you don't do anything, if you don't actively push a button, it will take you through every single season. It'll never stop. And so I think,
it's
yeah,
true.
that is a tool. You could say, oh, that's dangerous. Well, yeah, it's just their way of trying to get you to stay. And that's where we come to the media literacy. It's like, okay, I have a choice in this matter. I don't have to sit and watch, but you get sucked into it. Then we have to have that balance of, okay, how much self control do I have? Because we know there's an awful lot of binge watching going on out there.
Yes, there is.
You
I'm
got to watch out.
guilty.
Yeah, I gotta watch out for that. So I think those are some good principles. That's why we real focus on the whole concept. Media literacy is so broad, but trying to understand some of the tools that are used and what you can do to what guard against that or know how to better understand and use the media, I suppose.
Absolutely. And the same thing with I always find it funny on Netflix, for example. I think it takes, 2 or 3 hours of it going through episode after episode before. Are you still watching this? Are you still intending to be here? Are you there? But I think that is one way. And similar shows. Do you remember a few years ago, Netflix tried, it was I think there was even a voice that said, here, tell me a little bit about yourself and I'll share some content that you might like,
Hmm.
and they got rid of that, but they still have the same principle, right? Similar
Yeah,
shows that are like
yeah,
this particular show that you've watched, and
sure.
YouTube does that exact same thing.
Yeah,
Here's some content that you might like that's very similar.
yeah,
And so I think you're right. We do, with that personal locus idea, we just have to be thoughtful, I think, about, how much time we're investing, going back to that economic game, how much
hmm,
time we're investing on some of these mass mediums, and whether or not that is worth our time and our money to spend there as well.
Yeah, and that's why, try and decipher what our real needs are. Then that's the criticism of the
Yes.
uses and gratifications is that we're totally in control and we use the media for whatever gratifications we have, whatever that happens to be. But in reality, if we're not fully aware, then yeah, we can be tossed around with every wind of doctrine, as they say, every commercial that comes on the air. and and so, it's not, I guess it's not so much a battle. It could be, but it's understanding how the media works so we can use it for our benefit and not, just let it use us, which can easily be done, especially, you binge watch. I think one of the reasons they ask if you're still watching is they want to know somebody there so you can watch the commercials.
It's
Nobody's there.
true.
We're wasting our time. I want to see who's watching.
It's true. That's true. And I'm glad you brought up needs and interests, Brian. This is something that is talked about in the chapter. And I think it's important, as we've talked about in weeks past, to understand what your personal needs and interests are, because that can help you determine and make the most use of the mass media that's available out there, and use it to your advantage, like we've talked about. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Stacey, any last thoughts for today? I think we've reached our time limit of statute of limitations for comprehension and tolerance. But
No, I think that's it. Yeah, this chapter has a lot of great information, and I'm excited to see how the students feel about the VALS segmentation and their categorization, and whether or not they think it was accurate. So, always a fun week.
cool. Well, next time I think we're going to be talking about media exposure and maybe that very thing we talked about. Are we actually paying attention? Or are we just sleeping
Yes.
in front of the screen? Almost like, I have to watch out when I'm reading my scriptures at night. Do I actually remember any word that I just read? My eyes glazed over every word or not? So exposure versus attention, those kind of things. So that'll be fun to talk about. So look forward to that.
Yes.
Thanks, Stacey. Always good to chat with you.
You too, Brian. Have a good
Okay.
one.
We'll see you.